Again, there's no evidence that it's happening. You're like,
no 2020
we have a
cases
solution.
were lost. The cases were never heard, Congressman.
You're like, we have a solution in search of a problem. Where is the evidence that non-citizens are voting?
In this clip, you're about to watch something that doesn't happen very often on Fox News. A Democratic congressman walks straight into the voter fraud narrative. And instead of shouting, instead of getting flustered, instead of dodging, he keeps asking one simple question. Where's the evidence? You're going to see the conversation shift from court cases to we've seen many cases to something even more revealing. Pay attention to how the argument moves when receipts are requested. Pay attention to how the discussion jumps from legal standards to anecdotes. And watch closely when the Second Amendment gets pulled into the ICE debate, because that moment matters. Let's get into it.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, you voted against funding the Department of Homeland Security. Why?
Well, good morning, Maria. Thanks for having me. I voted against it, quite frankly, because I think Kristi Noem needs to resign or be fired by the president. Under the president's own metrics, this is someone who's holding up 200 miles of border wall. She's deported less people than Barack Obama. She's sent out less federal aid to red states under FEMA. And quite frankly, under the president's own metrics, she's taken his approval rating on immigration from 59% in August to 39% in January. Americans voted to have people deported, criminals and gang members. They did not vote for people to be shot in the street by masked men. And so I think Kristi Noem needs to go. For me, it's about Kristi Noem. It's always been about Kristi Noem. I'm a former director of emergency management here in Florida for a Republican governor. And she's absolutely destroyed FEMA and DHS. So what I'd like to start
ask you, Congressman, what do you propose if ICE agents are doing their job and citizens get in their face? I mean, many of your colleagues, including the governor, by the way, of Minnesota, told the people to take out their cameras, make sure that you're rolling on ICE operations and get in their face and try to stop their operations. Of course, those ICE agents are going to respond if citizens get in the way of their ICE operations. So what do you propose they do?
Well, look, it's a great question. We have this happen all the time. That's why we have the right to protest here in America.
Well, no, we don't see people getting in the way of ICE operations all the time. Now we do, because you've got Democrats with rhetoric out there saying, get in their faces, get your cameras out, roll on it. I mean, is that a responsible thing to do, to tell people to get in the faces of ICE operators?
Maria, we see it with police officers all the time in protests across the country on a number of issues. Police departments have training to deal with that. It's the ICE training that is failing. And so, look, I think governors and mayors need to obviously work with our federal government. That was part of the breakdown in Minnesota. OK, but in this country, you have a right to protest. OK, but you don't. U.S. citizens should not be shot in the face just because they're protesting ICE with their camera. We deal with this every day in this country. Police departments deal with it. OK, they know how to handle protests. This is on ICE. And the reason we now know this is,
if you've got a protester that is armed with a gun on his belt, and that person is getting in the way of an ICE operator, you're going to see a reaction. You don't have that all the time. You don't have people getting in their faces when they are armed. That is irresponsible. Of course they're going to react.
You have a right to carry in this country, and he had a permit for that weapon. And so, this has been an interesting debate that Republicans are having, because all of a sudden, you don't have a right to carry if you go to a protest in this country.
They didn't say you don't have a right to carry, but you should not be showing that you're carrying a gun and getting in the way of an ICE operator.
Yeah, he wasn't getting in the way of an ICE operator. He was filming to the side, and ICE decided to interact with...
Did he throw something at their car and knock out the light?
Yeah, there's evidence. There's evidence of that, Maria. But at the end of the day, if this was working so well, why did the president and Tom Homan pull out of Minnesota? It's because it's been an absolute and utter failure on behalf of ICE and behalf of DHS and behalf of Kristi Noem. She's more worried about where her blanket is than making sure that she's doing her job correctly and making sure that U.S. citizens in this country are safe, that they can protest safely, that ICE can do their job by enforcing the law against criminals and gang members, which is what the president president told us. And so, look, this has been a failure. That's why they've pulled out, and that's why Kristi Noem should resign.
Congressman, let me ask you another question. Are you going to vote yes for ID to vote?
I'm for photo ID. We have photo ID here in Florida. And so I have no problem with photo ID. We use photo ID here in Florida. It works very well. But that's somewhat different than what's being proposed. What's being proposed is a separate, completely different identification just for voting.
Completely different identification? No, wait a minute. Because the SAVE Act, the Save America Act, is requiring voters to show ID to vote. And they also require a citizenship so that you stay with the law and, in fact, only have American citizens voting. So, again, will you vote yes to that act?
Yes, again, there's no evidence that non-citizens are voting. Obviously, there's no evidence of that. There's been 60 or 70 court cases.
I don't know if you could say that, sir, because I think that there,
we can say that. Maria, there were 60 to 70 court cases over the 2020 election in which they made accusations that non-citizens were voting, and they lost all of those cases. So look, I'm for people using their driver's license.
The law is the law, and it is that American citizens vote in American elections. So having an ID to vote would be in step with the law. So are you going to vote for the law?
If they put forward a bill that says you can use your driver's license or your state-issued identification to vote, I support that. We have that in Florida, but the SAVE Act goes way beyond that. It would affect women whose birth certificate doesn't match their driver's license. It will depress turnout by requiring people to go and re-register to go get this new voter ID.
Congressman. That's not true.
No, it is. It is absolutely true. This is about depressing turnout. It's not about making sure non-citizens vote. Let them use their driver's license.
Either, Congressman. The SAVE Act is a requirement for ID to vote. Period.
Yeah, let them use their driver's license. We now have a federal program for the driver's license. If you can use your driver's license to fly on a plane, you use your driver's license to vote.
And your colleagues don't want it. Chuck Schumer said it's dead on arrival to have an ID to vote. That's what I'm saying. The driver's license is an adequate form of identification to vote. But your colleagues do not want any ID to vote. Why? Because it sounds like they would like illegals to vote. That's what it sounds like if you're against an act to require citizenship and an ID to vote. That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, and I support using your driver's license to vote. That's what we have here in Florida. Okay. It works really well. If the bill was you have to use your driver's license to vote, I would support it. It could be a one-line bill, Maria. Yeah. One line.
Okay. Okay, so you just want the bill adjusted. You want the bill adjusted to just have an ID to vote and the use of a driver's license. How do we know that the driver's license is going to be adequate if you have heard stories that they're giving driver's licenses to illegals?
Again, there's no evidence that non-citizens are voting in our elections, Maria. There's none. Where's the evidence? Where's the court cases? There's none of that.
We have seen many cases, in fact, that illegals have, in fact, tried to vote. You even have illegals driving big trucks, and they can't even read the signs because they're in English.
Again, Maria, dozens and dozens and dozens of court cases over the 2020 election. All of them lost.
So what you're saying is if, in fact, the bill is adjusted to require an ID to vote, that's all, and you just want a clean bill that says, yes, you can have an ID to vote, you will vote for it.
Yeah, if it's exactly that, like what we have here in Florida, where I go and they take my driver's license, they put it into the machine, and I go and I get my ballot, I'm totally good with that.
Well, there's a passport card that is being used as the actual ID that is necessary now above the driver's license because the driver's license issuance has been abused. Now, I wanted to ask you about this Mamdani.
There's a lot of people that don't have passports.
What?
There's a lot of people that don't have There's a lot of people that don't have passports, especially in rural America, don't have passports.
Okay. whether it's a passport or whether it's a driver's license, whatever the ID is used to prove that you're an American citizen is what the act is calling for. But I want to ask you about Zoran Mamdani's plans. He's now warning that he would like to propose a nearly 10% property tax if no tax is issued on the wealthiest in New York. Do you expect we're going to see an exodus out of New York into Florida?
Yeah, that's already happening, right? And we've seen it out of Chicago. Ken Griffin moved his whole company here to Florida. We see it out of California. You know, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg moved here. The Ellisons have purchased a lot of Palm Beach County. So we see this happening around the country. And yes, I think that if Mamdani's law were to go forward and he would increase taxes, I think a 9.5% increase, you'll see more people move here. By the way, that tax increase isn't just on the rich. It's on regular people making $122,000 median income. So it's not just on wealthy people.
Right. Well, $120,000 is a good salary. I mean, you know, that's what I'm saying. This is a policy that is driving New Yorkers out. And I'm wondering if you're thinking we're going to see a major exodus again, if in fact this takes place.
Yeah, no, I think the exodus is still going on. I think it'll continue. And again, these targeted wealth taxes that we see, right, from states, whether it's California or New York, the wealthy can just leave. Right, so these are not going to work.
Congressman, did you want to add anything, Mike Lee? Because I see you're here.
Well,
I have
look,
Mike Lee with me.
You know, there's 23 states that do automatic voter registration when you get a driver's license, and you know, 20 out of the 23 are blue states. You don't need to be a citizen. You don't even need to be here legally to get a. To get a driver's license. Like, if you're not concerned with illegals voting, then why can't we prove citizenship, right? If you're saying it doesn't happen, then why can't we just write it in law?
Well, again, there's no evidence that it's happening. You're like,
no 2020
we have a
cases
solution.
Were lost. The cases were never heard, Congressman.
You're like, we have a solution in search of a problem. Where is the evidence that non-citizens are voting?
The cases were never heard, Congressman. And you make a great point on driver's license. Thank you. We'll keep following it, sir. Thank you. Jared Moskowitz in Florida. We'll be right back.
All right. Let's slow this down properly, because what just happened here wasn't just a heated exchange. It was a textbook example of what happens when a narrative runs into a demand for evidence. Let's start with the voter fraud portion, because that's where the moment everyone will remember actually happened. Maria Bartiromo says, "We have seen many cases." Moskowitz responds calmly, "Where's the evidence? Where are the court cases?" That question is not rhetorical, it's structural. After the 2020 election, there were more than 60 court cases filed alleging widespread voter fraud. Those cases were heard in state courts, federal district courts, appellate courts, and even reached the Supreme Court. Judges appointed by both Republican and Democratic presidents dismissed them for lack of evidence. Not procedural technicalities, not hidden conspiracies, lack of evidence. That matters. If non-citizens were voting at scale, you would expect documented prosecutions, statistical anomalies, or at minimum sustained court victories. Instead, what you typically find are isolated cases. A handful here, a handful there, often involving confusion, paperwork errors, or individuals who are later prosecuted. That's not systemic fraud. That's individual illegality, which already has penalties under existing law. Now here's where the exchange becomes revealing. When pressed for proof, the conversation shifts from data to vibes. We've seen many cases. Then suddenly it becomes, you even have illegals driving big trucks and they can't read the signs because they're in English. That's not evidence. No, that's anecdote. And in argumentation, there's a name for that. It's called the anecdotal fallacy. It's when a single story, or even a vivid personal impression, is used to imply a broad systemic problem without statistical backing. You cannot infer national election fraud from highway observations. Now let's talk about the SAVE Act debate, because this is where nuance matters. Moskowitz says he supports voter ID using a driver's license, which Florida already does. That's important. Florida requires photo ID to vote. It works. Millions of Floridians vote under that system without chaos. But the SAVE Act proposal goes further. It would require documentary proof of citizenship, potentially beyond a standard driver's license, depending on how the bill is structured and implemented. And here's the legal complexity. In many states, driver's licenses are issued to non-citizens who are legally present. Some states also issue limited licenses to undocumented immigrants. That does not automatically mean those individuals are registered to vote. Voter registration databases are separate systems with citizenship requirements and perjury penalties. But critics argue that automatic voter registration systems in some states create administrative vulnerability. Supporters of the SAVE Act argue it closes that vulnerability. Opponents argue it adds bureaucratic barriers that could disproportionately impact married women whose legal names differ from birth certificates, rural voters without passports, and low-income citizens who lack ready access to documentation. Both sides are making structural arguments. One is about fraud prevention, the other is about access barriers. Now here's the important pivot moment. When Moskowitz says, if the bill simply required using a driver's license like Florida, I'd support it, that undercuts the idea that Democrats oppose voter ID entirely. What he's rejecting is not identification. He's rejecting what he frames as overcorrection. And then Bartiromo raises passports. There are tens of millions of Americans who do not have passports, particularly in rural areas and among lower-income populations. Requiring passports as a default voting ID would materially change turnout dynamics. That's not speculation, that's basic demographic math. Now let's rewind to the ICE portion of the debate because that section exposed something else. Maria suggests protesters are getting in ICE agents' faces and causing escalation. Moskowitz pivots to police protest protocol and Second Amendment rights. Here's the subtle trap he sets. He points out that the protester was legally armed. If conservatives argue that lawful gun carrying is a constitutional right, then arguing that legal open carry automatically justifies force undercuts their own Second Amendment absolutism. It forces ideological consistency. If open carry is sacred, it's sacred even when politically inconvenient. Now, does that mean protesters should obstruct federal agents? No. Interference with federal law enforcement can be prosecuted, but the constitutional right to protest and the constitutional right to carry do not evaporate simply because federal officers are present. That's the tension. And notice something else. Every time Moskowitz asks for evidence, the response shifts to fear framing. Ballots, borders, big trucks, blue states, automatic registration. Fear framing is powerful because it bypasses data and activates instinct. But elections are not governed by instinct. They are governed by procedure, law, database audits, signature verification, chain of custody rules, and bipartisan oversight boards. If systemic non-citizen voting were occurring at meaningful scale, it would leave forensic traces, statistical anomalies, arrest waves, verified case clusters. Instead, what you typically see are isolated prosecutions, numbering in the dozens or low hundreds, in a country of over 160 million registered voters. That's not a stolen election. That's human error and occasional criminality, which already carries felony penalties. Now here's the bigger picture. This wasn't just a debate about voter ID. It was a clash between evidence-based framing and narrative-based framing. Moskowitz kept demanding court cases, documentation, and numbers. Bartiromo kept pivoting to stories, impressions, and suspicion. That contrast is why the moment felt so stark. And here's the uncomfortable truth for both sides. Election integrity matters. Access to voting matters. You can support secure elections and still demand empirical proof before rewriting federal law. Those are not mutually exclusive positions. But when you replace evidence with highway anecdotes, you lose credibility. And credibility is the currency of democratic systems. Now I want you to think about this. If the strongest evidence presented for widespread non-citizen voting is, we've seen many cases and I saw a truck driver who couldn't read English road signs, what does that say about the strength of the claim? Is that investigative journalism? Or is that atmosphere building? Because there's a difference. And that difference is exactly what this exchange exposed.